Rescue hooks to rescue, Mayday! Get ahead, West. Bad Mayday, what's your location? Get the hell out of here, hurry up! We need radio silence, baby. Water in that 2.5-inch line. 48 inch water in a 2.5-inch line. To the rope, to the rope. 35 in the rear, 35 in the rear.
Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Well, hello there. Welcome to another episode of the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Thank you for joining us as we explore firefighter line of duty deaths to learn from these tragic events. This week is episode number 63. Probably is the last episode of our third season. I'm joined by Dirk and Denis. After some current events in the fire service discussion, we will explore the NIOSH report regarding a fatal dumpster fire in rural Wisconsin that occurred in December of 2009. So get ready to listen and learn about the traumatic death of Lieutenant Steve Peanut Kozer and several other firefighters who were injured at this call. I'll bring in Dirk and Denis now. Hello, Denis and Dirk. How's it going today?
Okay, I'm doing well, Paul. Thank you for asking.
Good. Yeah, you've been keeping warm and busy working away.
Oh, I was already outside shoveling snow. It's coming down like crazy, and it's pretty nippy out there. Something about wind chill of minus 27. Not sure whether it's in Fahrenheit for our American friends here, but
I
it's
walked the
cold.
dogs this morning. It was cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that 0 in Fahrenheit? Not sure.
About there. Yeah.
Yeah.
+6 here.
Shush.
Sun shining. Nice breeze.
+6 in Fahrenheit.
No. If we get much more weather like this with the rain and the warmer weather, we're going to have to look to see tulips coming up. I don't know.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Well, we'll send you some winter.
It's been sub-zero for weeks. So anyway.
Yeah, it's supposed to warm up here around Christmas. So that's good.
Yeah. Our saying around here is if you don't like the weather, wait a minute.
Yeah. Same here. Yeah.
But we're getting a big dump of the white stuff over the weekend. Thank you very much, you guys. For
okay. Good. Perfect.
Okay, good.
Feel left out.
Yeah. Well, they say there's going to be a line where it's going to be white and not white.
You guys get that like 2 feet at a time thing. We don't usually get that. Yeah. What's new in the fire service these days? Any stories you want to share?
I'm not sure. I think I posted it on the Facebook site there. There was a like a row house project in the Netherlands that had a big gas explosion. Six people died. So no firefighters were injured, but that looked like a
bunch of civvies.
Big incident there. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. We saw that post yesterday about Sedgwick County, Wichita, Kansas, where the city, a civilian died in a fire, and there was a lot of conflict between the firefighters union and the municipality and the dispatch center over the call, and so the county hired Jensen Hughes, real reputable fire service consulting firm, to do an investigation. And their investigation was released, and they audited the fire department operations for not following policies and stuff like that.
Not good.
Dispatch.
Not good.
Yeah, so we're probably do a tailboard talk on that one. Just reading up on it, and we'll probably do a tailboard talk. But we're going to see more and more of this, as the public and various agencies want to see a certain level of service, and if you don't provide it, there's going to be questions.
Yeah, it's the whole legal side, right? That's we just talked about before the show. It's a big part of fire department, the legal side and the moral side of it. So let's have a table talk about that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I've been chief in a couple of composite departments, or career volunteer combined departments, as they call it in the States. And if you've got conflicts on a day-to-day basis or a lack of respect on a day-to-day basis, you're going to have those at the fire scene, and they're going to be worse. And you can't just sit by and let that happen. You have to get to the root of the issue. And if the issue is a lack of confidence because of a lack of training or lack of skills, then you need to address those. And often that's what it is. I mean, there's some base level there's some base level issues with, whose job is it and that kind of stuff. But you need to get beyond that, and you need to talk about, what the issues are and get them solved. Because if it's not going well in the firehouse, it's not going to go well at the fire scene. Really, that's
Exactly. Yeah.
you can't ignore it. You just cannot. It's not going away on its own.
I see that Ontario has is going to establish a corp systems or a core for volunteers for emergencies, or they're copying. Although the article said Ontario first to unveil this, Nova Scotia did this about 6 months ago, and sort of drawing on the same volunteer pool that Team Rubicon and Red Cross and Search and Rescue and everybody else depends on. What's your thoughts on that,
Yeah,
Piggy?
yeah. I have a lot of thoughts on those, but seeing as we're a public broadcasting here, I don't really want to share them that way. But I have some doubts as to its effectiveness and to motivations behind it. So uh, certainly there needs to be a lot done. There's no question about that.
So obviously they're recognizing a need for some sort of
Yeah,
more
yeah,
than the military. What do we do in an emergency? And
yeah.
so there's a recognition of the need. I guess that's a step in the right direction.
The thing about that is that, when you start saying we're going to solve provincial problems by uh, by subscribing volunteers, then I immediately know that you recognize the issue, or at least you think you do, but you're not willing to spend any money or any significant amount of money on it. So
Yeah,
I think that overall that tends to be a guiding principle with government, is if they can do something that costs nothing, they're all for it. And so I have my concerns in that regard because,
I
um,
like I like the CERT training that FEMA has, where
yeah,
they teach. If the community gets engaged, they teach the community to do emergency response training for citizens at large, and I really think that's a good way to do it. They should be doing that. Niagara Falls had a active CERT thing last year. I don't know if it's still going on.
but CERT is based on the emergency management principle of being self-sufficient for up to 72 hours, and they're talking about communities being able to look after themselves for maybe the 72 hours, give or take, by tapping into the guy down the street like me, a retired firefighter, who could help their community if the community was organized and recognized that. And so yeah, I think that's the basis of that. And I don't think these corps, or in Nova Scotia called the Nova Scotia Guard, it's broader than that. And so like I signed up for it because I figured I'd know more about it if I was on the inside than the outside. And they could call me up and say, we need you to travel to the other end of the province for 2 weeks. So that's not local um,
Right,
provision of
that's
local services.
beyond CERT.
That's
Yeah.
beyond that. I mean, it's like some of the organizations you were talking about,
Hmm, hmm.
and it takes professional level organization and support to make that happen. It's not happening on the basis of me getting in my pickup truck and putting as many cases of water in the back and driving off for 2 weeks and hoping I actually accomplish something.
Like
It's
they
not like
had
that at all.
in the hurricane. Which one was it that hit Texas there? And they had the Acadian Army came down and with all their powerboats and big pickups, and they rescued
Yeah,
thousands of people and put out
yeah,
fires and did all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
The Cajun Navy, they called it Cajun Navy.
yeah.
That's what it
Yeah,
was.
and I think there's a place for all of those things, but I think when you start depending on those types of organizations, that's a fundamental uh, failure, shortcoming on government, that they're not filling the gaps as they need to do.
Yeah,
So
it's yeah.
anyway,
Sort of like Buffalo Fire not having any snowmobiles and tracked vehicles and stuff. Hey, did you see that, Dirk? They bought a side by side with tracks on it in Buffalo this year after they had that devastating snowstorm a couple of years ago and couldn't rescue people and stuff like that. They're actually buying some equipment to respond to snow
Well,
emergencies, which
they had some equipment. We showed you that, but
they
it
no,
was
they had
just
a sit on top ATV, which can't do anything.
yeah, it was a snowmobile thing, but the one. Like,
One, yeah. So they're
it's a
beefing
big
up.
city, so if you have that big snowstorm, one isn't enough. So,
Right. Yeah, they use
but
the crack
again,
truck.
yeah,
every volunteer fire department in Nova Scotia owns one of those.
Yeah.
yeah, they bring it from home. That's different.
No, 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 no. Oh, yeah,
No, they buy
that
them.
too.
That
Yeah,
too,
that too.
yeah.
Yeah. There's that community involvement again.
Yeah.
Another
I know some
interesting,
guys that drive around all winter with their snowmobile and their pickup truck in case they need it.
just in case. Yeah, that's right. I used to carry tire chains in my pickup too, but anyway.
Well, that was
Um,
probably smart.
That was, yeah. I don't have any right now, but another
Oh,
thing I noticed was the IAFF is providing wildfire interface training. It was launched in Quebec in the Maritimes for firefighters. It's called RTI training. I don't know what that stands for, but it's through the Association of Firefighters, and they're trying to train up firefighters to better be able to be to handle the Jasper type fires, if you will, where the fire comes from the wildland into the urban area. So that was an interesting
Yeah,
article. We're
WUIs,
going to see
Wildland
more on
Urban
that.
Interface. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to see more on that. And a birdie tells me that effective command is rolling out across Canada. Ontario, a bunch of places are doing it, and there's places in Alberta and Manitoba that are trying out this new incident command training system to train and certify incident commanders to be able to do a better job, which is great. Sort of like Blue Card, some sort of certification system, doing scenarios and getting better at our command, which is exactly what this podcast often talks about, is where command falls down because they're overwhelmed or not trained or not communicating enough, and people die. So it's good to see that we're getting better at that here in Canada. Any else that you saw new lately in the magazines or news?
I bought some new books, like more than the two I showed you.
Oh yeah, you bought a whole bunch of books, did you?
Oh yeah, yeah. I bought the Book of Search, which was
Right.
released
Yes.
here a couple of weeks ago on Amazon, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like the Book of Andy. Uh, Pretty sure that most of our listeners know about the Book of Andy. It's a PDF. You can print it off yourself, and it's basically a collection of articles that Andy Fredericks wrote. That book is, by the way, also available on Amazon now in a printed version um, for the crazy collectors like me that just like to have books but never read them, actually. Um, and then the Book of Search, same thing, same idea, is a collection of articles about search. So from the command perspective, from the interior perspective, from the outside perspective. So primary, secondary searches. So super interesting. But there's also a PDF. You can download that for free on Firehouse Vigilant website. So highly recommend everybody checking it out and downloading it and looking at it and maybe printing it off at some point.
And more from the emergency management side, because that's what I do now is train emergency managers, and I downloaded a video. I've been listening to a podcast called 5 Minutes to Chaos, and it's by Stephen Kerr, and it's all emergency management stuff. It's really well done. I like it. They always interview emergency managers post events to talk about them. And they had a doctor on there who wrote a book called Walking Through Fire: The Train Disaster of Waverly, Tennessee, which happened in 1978. It's a long time ago, I know, but I remember when I was taking hazmat training in the 90s, the instructor, a guy by the name of Daryl Bagnode, they called him the Raging Cajun. He was from Louisiana. He came up and did a bunch of courses for us. And he talked about this Waverly disaster because it was really the one of the impetuses for FEMA and for hazmat training and for the NFPA 1072,
Yeah.
used to be 472 training. And
Yeah.
this is the train derailment where the train derailed. The propane car sat around in the town for 2 days. They were slowly offloading them and they were moving them loaded. And actually, the fire chief and the police chief got killed in the explosion. The fire chief was saying, no, 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 this isn't safe. We need to evacuate. We need to maintain the cordon. The railway was saying, oh, no, it's fine. It'll be okay. Don't worry. These cars are really strong. And when they moved one of the cars that was already had a huge crease in it, and the temperature warmed up. It was cold and snowy for 2 days. The temperature warmed up, which therefore the pressure in the car increased. Eventually, the car blew up and killed dozens of people and injured hundreds of people and burned 12 buildings down. Anyway, I'm reading the book now, Walk Through Fire, Train Disaster of Waverly. It's actually about her parents, who were the two doctors at the hospital. And so that's kind of centered around that, but interesting. And now we're going to do an episode on this one just because it was a landmark
Yeah.
moment in
Yeah.
history.
I was on the fire department then, just so you know.
78. Yeah, I was not quite. I was still in high school. Anyway, there's some more books to talk about. Okay, this week's episode 63, is St. Anna, Wisconsin. In December 29th of 2009, a 33-year-old male firefighter died, and 8 other firefighters, including a lieutenant and a junior firefighter, were injured when a dumpster exploded at a foundry in Wisconsin. This information is all from NIOSH Report F 2009-31. And we're going to learn more about this incident because it's significant in that how many times do we go to dumpster fires and it's nothing, right? Grab the booster reel or grab the pre-connect and throw a little water in there and go back and finish your supper kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of a little bit different dumpsters than we normally respond to.
Yeah, but you could get a dumpster at a machine shop in your city any day of the week, right? I mean, yeah, you think of the normal apartment building dumpster, but there could be an e-scooter in there. You never know when that might blow up and kill you, general
Yeah.
Russian general guy,
Yeah.
or whatever. You never know what's in them.
Yeah. Also, this is a very small community, crossroads community, essentially volunteer fire service too. So there's that aspect of this incident also.
Yeah,
Where they get
no,
very few calls during the year, but this one was a doozy.
yeah. I'll talk about the fire department here briefly. So, the volunteer fire department involved in this incident had one station with approximately 25 volunteer firefighters and 7 apparatus, serving a population of about 1,000 residents in a geographic area of approximately 25 square miles. As you said, Denny, it's a fairly small community. The fire department averages 20 total calls per year. The fire department had been called to this foundry a few times in the past for the smell of smoke in the building, but there were never any fires. The previous calls ended up being overheated drive belts on electrical motors. The fire department had no documented standard operating guidelines. I'll talk about the training. Do you want to add anything, guys?
This is exactly like the first fire department I was on in Dalmeny, Saskatchewan. 1,400 residents, 3 or 4 trucks, and very few calls. This is where I started, and I took a 1 week evenings basic firefighting course, from the government of Saskatchewan, which was basically everything in a few nights in 1 week, and it's just enough to hurt myself.
Yeah, it's tough when you don't get many calls or train a lot.
Yeah.
As for training experience, the firefighters and officers had responded to an incident were trained at 7 had level 1, including the victim. Of these, 4 had firefighter 2. 2 respondents include the chief had formal hazmat training level 1. 3 had non-formal training beyond on-the-job training. For the personal protective equipment, at the time of the incident, the victim and firefighter number 4 were in full PPE and had done their SCBA with integrated pass alarm. The other injured firefighters, the lieutenant and the IC, were wearing personal protective equipment consistent of turnout coats, pants, a helmet, and boots. Only the officers had portable radios. At the time of the incident, the weather conditions in the area were clear with an approximate temperature of 14 degrees Fahrenheit, 70% relative humidity, visibility 10 miles, and a southwest wind of approximately 10 miles per hour. Prior to the incident, a substantial amount of snow had fallen and the parking lot had been cleared, which created a 4-foot snowbank around the parking lot perimeter.
So the site of this incident, it was a recycling dumpster on the grounds of a foundry, which is still in business today, by the way. They produced aluminum sand casting from various aluminum alloys. The 70,000 square foot foundry has been in business for over 73 years and currently employs about 100 people. The metal casting facility melts about 375,000 pounds of aluminum every month. This is a big operation. The fire department had walked through the facilities 2 years prior to the incident, but there was no documentation of the hazards associated with the outside disposal area, and these were not viewed or considered at the time. Several of the volunteer members had worked at the facility or had relatives that worked there, thus they felt somewhat familiar with the facility. We're going to do our virtual 360 here just to paint a picture of the lay of the land. While responding to the foundry a few miles west of the town in the rural farming area, it was a 2-lane country road where the firefighters would have found very large cinder block and metal buildings. It was surrounded by trees on the Charlie and Delta side, the road frontage on the Alpha side, and the open fields on the Bravo side. From Google Maps, it appears that there have been several expansions and additions to the buildings as the company grew, both along the frontage side and definitely to the rear. It got a lot deeper. There was 2 entrance driveways. The first one for staff and visitors near the offices on the east side or the Delta side of the building. Beyond that, a few hundred feet down the road was the service or truck entrance that accessed the loading docks, dumpsters, and storage areas. This entrance does have a roadway that's apparently gravel, and it actually circles around the building through the Charlie side and back to the other side, to the Delta side, the staff entrance, so trucks could go right around when they were coming in to pick up or drop off loads. The dumpster in question was made of 3/8 inch to 1/4 inch thick steel and measured approximately 17 feet long by 5 feet wide by 7 feet high. The dumpster contained about a month's worth of aluminum alloy shavings, foundry floor sweepings, which consisted of dirt, metal particles, and processing fluids, like cutting oil and stuff, and several open-top 55-gallon drums of slag.
Aluminum alloy slag is a byproduct of the foundry's casting process and is produced during the separation of the molten aluminum or aluminium, like the Europeans say, alloy from impurities while in the aluminum casting furnace. The slag occurs as a molten liquid melt and is a complex solution of silicates and oxides that solidifies upon cooling.
A representative dumpster and content similar to that one that exploded are shown in the photos, so we'll put them on the socials. The dumpster was located in the southwest corner of the foundry's property. Dumpsters of different dimensions and contents were located in the same area. There was a utility pole, a commercial electrical panel box, and a fenced-in electrical substation, assumably powered for the foundry. Within the 2 previous years, the foundry went from having 3 to 1 shift per day, which reduced the amount of waste being produced. Remember, this was 2009, so there was a bit of a recession going on. When the foundry was operating under 3 shifts per day, they kept the 55-gallon drums of slag stacked together and separate from the aluminum alloy shavings and other metal scrap. After the reduction in shifts, a recycling company requested that the foundry add the drums to the dumpster contents after the slag had solidified, so that waste could be picked up in one load. Keeping the drums of slag separate from the open-air dumpster contents per the previous storage method, when there were 3 shifts operating, ensured that no contaminants or heat transfer from the slag would mix with the dumpster contents. And of course, this slag can be warm as it comes out of the castings.
Yeah, darn warm.
Yeah, you know, darn warm. Yeah. The following investigation synopsis details events leading up to the fatal incident. A deputy sheriff patrol car video recording of the south side of the incident scene and interviews from the on-scene firefighters were used to reconstruct the events leading to the event. The victim was part of a second crew pulling an 1 3/4 hose line into position when the explosion occurred.
So the south side is the alpha side of the structure. So on December 29th, 2009, a 33-year-old firefighter died, and 8 other firefighters, including a lieutenant and a junior firefighter who was less than 18 years of age, were injured in a dumpster explosion at this foundry in Wisconsin. In 1933 hours, dispatch responded to a report of a dumpster fire at the foundry. So we don't know if it was called in or automatic alarm. Probably called in, right? At 1941 hours, so that's 8 minutes after the dispatch, Engine 11, with the fire chief driving, and Tanker 17 arrived on the scene to find a dumpster emitting 2-foot-high bluish-green flames from its open top and having a 10-inch reddish-orange glow in the middle of the dumpster's south side, again facing the Alpha side road. And this glow was near the bottom, so it's like the fire was at the bottom of the dumpster. The Engine 11 captain manned the pumper while firefighter 1 and another firefighter pulled an 1 3/4 hose line to the west side of the dumpster. So that would have been the Bravo side of the dumpster. The IC called for firefighter 2 to get the attic ladder from Engine 11 so that he could examine the contents of the dumpster. I guess he intended to climb and peer over the edge. After stepping on the first rung, the IC noticed aluminum shavings, foundry floor sweepings, and a 55-gallon drum in the dumpster. After observing the contents and the color of the flames, the IC believed that metal cutting fluids and or oils were what was burning. 2 foundry employees were on scene at that time and assured the IC that no magnesium was in the dumpster. So everybody knows how combustible magnesium is, particularly when
Tell
you
us
put
about
water
it.
on
What
it.
happens when you put water on magnesium? It's kind of like a lithium
Yeah.
ion battery, right? Just goes boom.
Yeah. It's a great party trick, but not this time. At 1942 hours, which is almost 10 minutes after the call came in, Engine 14 and Equipment Truck 15 arrived on scene. Engine 14 pulled up to the south of Engine 11, ET15, which is the truck. The equipment truck, staged to the east side in the parking lot. The IC then requested that the first assistant chief and another firefighter set up a dump tank for the tanker. So this is a non-serviced area.
That's good.
With a
They're
charged
thinking of
hose.
water supply.
Sorry, Paul?
That's good. They're thinking of water supplies. You'd think a foundry,
Yep.
70,000 square feet, there must be water there.
Yeah, there's likely a static source at the very least.
Maybe, yeah.
Although I remember when I was the fire chief in one area, one county, and there's parts of the county you could drill a hole into the ground and get water coming out in the hundreds of gallons a minute.
Oh, wow. Well, where we are, we have lots of big buildings in the country that get accepted because of the lack of permitting and all that kind of stuff, and then there's no water.
Yeah. Well, we could get into a discussion on how those things happen, but that's for another day, I think. With the charged hose line positioned 20 feet away from the west side of the dumpster, which is, again, the Bravo side of the dumpster, and at the same time standing on a 4-foot snowbank. So this bin's, 7 feet high, and they're 4 feet up already on the snowbank. Firefighter number 2 began to flow water using a fog nozzle and was also backed up by another firefighter, firefighter 1. The lieutenant from Engine 14 took over the fog nozzle after telling firefighter 2 to go and put an air pack on. The hose line crew flowed approximately 700 gallons of water at 50 psi per square inch with no effect on the fire, which prompted the IC to call for foam at that point. At 1945 hours, so that's about 12 minutes after the call started, Tanker 16 arrived on scene, followed by a junior firefighter who was driving his privately owned vehicle. The junior firefighter reported to the first assistant chief and was instructed to go over to Engine 14 and to get a radio and to listen for tool requests. So I guess his job was to relay tools from the engine to the scene. Truck 17 left the scene to go and refill. The victim and firefighter 4 were pulling another 1 3/4 hose line from Engine 11, while firefighter 2 and firefighter 3 straightened out the hose line, so kicking out the kinks. Firefighter number 6 assisted Tanker 16 in backing up to the dump tank and was preparing to assist with the dump.
I'm happy to see they got a shuttle and stuff going. I'm happy to see they got a shuttle going and they're relay, dumping and going to refill. So those are all good things. Believe it or not, there's still a lot of fire departments that don't like doing that, and they'll just nurse from the tender and not get much water. So these guys they're set. They've done this before.
Well, I would suggest that this department, that is their water supply go-to. That's what they do.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be any hydrants in this area at all, I'm sure, unless they're a private hydrant. And so, yes, they should have facility at this, and they clearly do. So about 100 gallons of foam solution, approximately 6 gallons of Class AB foam concentrate. So the solution is 100 gallons at 6% is what you've got going there.
Yeah.
From Engine 11's internal foam reduction system, they started at 1% and then increased it up to 3% and increase the nozzle pressure up to 100 psi. And they were putting that on the fire, and again with no noticeable effect. At approximately 1953, which is 20 minutes into the fire, just as the IC was calling to discontinue foam operations, the contents of the dumpster started sparking, and then within seconds exploded, sending shrapnel and the barrels that were in the dumpster into the air. The explosion fatally injured the victim and also injured 8 other firefighters at that time.
Really curious to see what happened there. So we're going to look into the fire behavior. The key characteristics of this fire were a metal fire, primarily aluminum alloy shavings with approximately 2-foot high bluish green flames and a 10-inch reddish orange glow at the bottom of the steel dumpster. Approximately 700 gallons of water was put in the fire with no change in fire intensity and the water turning into steam. About 100 gallons of Class AB foam solution was put on the fire with, again, no change in fire intensity. Then white sparks began shooting into the air and there was an explosion. Per the state fire marshal's report, the cause and origin of the fire is listed as undetermined, and the cause of the explosion was a result of the fire suppression efforts and the introduction of water and suppressant foam. After conducting a combustible metal literature review, one speculative theory is that a thermite reaction started from aluminum shavings and particles mixed with the metal oxides or silicon oxides, wet sand, which generates enough energy to ignite the aluminum shavings and particles. Once started, the thermite reaction does not need air from the outside to continue burning. The addition to wet extinguishing agent, in this case water and foam solution, on the fire most likely generated hydrogen gas due to the volatile reaction with the aluminum which exploded. Factors that may have contributed to the thermite reaction are the last slag barrel put in the dumpster was still too hot to touch, normally allowed to cool 24 hours, but in this case, only 1.5 to 3 hours. Initial temperature of the slag is 1,425 degrees Fahrenheit when put inside a barrel.
Warm.
It's very, very warm. Warm to the touch. The iron oxide, commonly known as rust, in the dumpster and on the slag barrels. There's a note here: thermal pattern and iron oxide on slag barrels shown in photo 2. So we got pictures of this, and listeners can take a look at that. The melting of the snow laying on top of the dumpster's content may have initially started the generation and or release of hydrogen gas. The reaction of small aluminum shaving particles with any or all of the above mentioned factors has the potential to cause a thermite reaction. Reportedly, the slag barrel was too hot to touch and only cooled for 1 to 3 hours when placed in the dumpster. Temperature of the slag barrel could have been 700 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit range, which is still not much cooler, and may have directly initiated the thermite reaction. In addition to silicon oxide being part of the alloy process, the iron oxide or rust on the slag barrels and on the walls of the steel dumpster provided another means for the most common of thermite reactions to occur. The thawing or melting snow could have further hydrated the iron oxide, and or silicon oxide, which could have changed the energy being released when mixed with the aluminum shavings to cause the ignition of the aluminum shavings. That is a lot of hazmat talk.
Yeah, that's good. Good for you.
The NFPA standard for combustible metals states that the application of wet extinguishing agents, particularly water hose streams, accelerates a combustible metal fire and could result in an explosion. In addition, water reacting with aluminum can give off highly flammable hydrogen gas. And the first thing I heard metal fire, I thought of a Metal X fire extinguisher. They probably need more than one, but
Yeah.
in this case, water was the wrong solution, literally.
Yeah. So
Let it
they use
let
the
it
term
burn out.
they, yeah. So they use the term thermite several times in there, right? And so, so thermite reactions are chemical reactions that, they occur, with metal powders and metal oxides. And so they can ignite, right? Because your metal powder is your fuel, and your metal oxides provides the oxygen side of the fire triangle. And so those two come together under the right conditions, which is, heat and humidity, moisture, and then you can have a nice bang going on. And aluminum is commonly used in fireworks and for enhancing explosives, right? So it's a common compound for that.
Such as
So
aluminum nitrate.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So you can see how this happened.
Yeah. We did a magnesium fire. We had a Land Rover that was joyriding in the hills outside of town, and it landed upside down, and gasoline was dripping from the fuel tank into the compartment, and there was lots of magnesium in the vehicle. And I remember we pulled up and hit it with an inch and a half or inch and three quarter, and it really reacted violently. And even foam really didn't do much. Eventually, I had just bought some medium expansion foam nozzles, and so we ended up putting them on and just covering this vehicle. We had a big snowball of foam over this vehicle, and it finally went out. But yeah, violent reaction for sure. And it probably didn't go out because of our suppression.
Yeah. You'd have to super cool it very quickly, basically dunk it
Yeah.
to have any effect. I would say, but every metal will burn, right? Because they
Yeah.
all oxidize or rust. Aluminum, iron, uh, steel. They all burn. And if they burn, they can go bang under certain conditions.
Yeah. So beware of burning metals, especially if it's in a shavings form or any
Yeah,
kind of small form.
yeah.
Yeah.
High surface to mass ratio.
Right. The cause of death and injuries, according to the medical examiner's autopsy report, the victim died from multiple injuries as a result of a blunt force trauma. According to medical records, all the firefighters' injuries were due to the explosion and resulting in the debris impact or noise-related injuries. Recommendations to prevent such an incident from happening, which could happen almost anywhere nowadays, is fire departments should ensure that high-risk sites such as factory foundries, mills, processing plants, etc., are pre-planned by conducting a walkthrough by all possible responding fire departments, and that the plan is updated annually. Of course, these guys did do a walkthrough a couple of years ago, but obviously missed the risk in the waste from this plant that could be a problem. And often that's where it's those tertiary processes that often end up being the problem in a manufacturing process. You would know all about that, Denis, from your background. But it's those auxiliary things, ancillary things that just happen in order to facilitate everything else that usually you get the fly in the ointment.
Yeah. So not everybody's got a foundry in their town, but virtually every town's got some type of metalworking facility, like a machine shop. And if you've got machine shops, where they're doing a lot of milling work, or they're doing a lot of turning work, and they're generating a lot of metal chips and shavings and stuff. Your millwrights and your machinists will always try to keep their work area clear. They gather that stuff up and they put it in barrels, steel barrels, and lots of times there's water in those barrels, because those things with the machining oils and the small metal chips and shavings, they can combust, catch fire, and you can lose your facility because of that. So as a fire department, if you've got a machine shop, a serious size machine shop or anything like that in your community, you could have an incident similar to this, just from the results of the waste that they generate.
Yeah, woodworking shops, machine shops, grain processing facilities, food processing facilities, they can all produce dust that can be flammable.
Yeah, nasty stuff.
Yeah, so it says here, a discussion, the NFPA 1620 standard for pre-incident planning states that pre-incident plans should be the foundation for decision making during emergency situations and provide important data that will assist the incident commander in developing appropriate strategies and tactics for managing the incident. In this incident, the fire department had walked through the facility 2 years prior to the incident, but there was no documentation, and the hazards associated with the outside disposal area were not identified or considered at that time. Of course, the hazards weren't there because they weren't putting the slag barrels in with the rest of the stuff. They changed their process because the company had slowed down a bit.
But if you had visited here and seen 300 pallets piled up against the building in the loading dock area, as a firefighter, you would have flagged that as a problem. Most of us, and you would have said you've got uh, uh, too much combustible material stored close to the building, or indeed in one spot. And a lot of code issues talk about tire storage and waste storage and piles no bigger than and spaces beyond. So having a whole lot of metal shavings in a quite a large dumpster actually is actually a high quantity of combustibles. You need to recognize that.
Yeah, exactly. Look for those risks, right? That's why I think everybody should take at least basic safety codes, Fire Inspector 1, just to be aware of these risks, because we're in the community. These risks are going to bite us when we go to a call at 2 a.m.
Yeah. But several of the fire department members actually work there.
Yeah.
So that raises the question. I wonder, in a general sense, if the workers at that facility were aware of the risk.
Yeah.
And clearly not when they put a 1,400-degree barrel inside this bin along with all the combustible materials that were in there.
Right.
Maybe they were too familiar. That was just like, that's what we do. That
Yes.
I don't see a problem with that, because there has never been a fire. There was never a problem. So what we've done works fine.
Yeah, right. But there was an exception.
Get that with the hazmat guys all the time. Oh, these tanks are tough. It can't happen. It'll be fine. Waverly, Tennessee, 1978.
But the exception here was they normally allowed the drums to cool 24 hours. Yep. This time they allowed the drum to cool less than 3 hours.
Yeah, so they didn't follow their own rules, basically.
Right. So somebody somewhere along the line made a decision that these drums needed to cool for 24 hours so that they were cold enough to be put in the waste bin. But somehow or other, the thinking behind that and the knowledge behind that decision was not common across the board for everybody to understand why that is. And somebody took a shortcut.
Yep, exactly.
Recommendation number 2. Fire departments should ensure that specialized training is acquired for high-risk sites with unique hazards such as combustible metals. So discussion that goes with this recommendation is that fire departments often respond to complex or unique hazards which require specialized and or even advanced knowledge and or training specifically in dealing with that particular hazard. So combustible metal fires present unique and dangerous hazards to firefighters, and they're not commonly encountered in a conventional firefighting operations, unless you're a plant firefighter, fire brigade guy in that facility. But as a municipal firefighter, definitely not. So the temperatures encountered in a combustible metal fire far exceed those of your normal structure fire. So referring to NFPA 484 now, this report was written in 2009. So I'm not even sure 484 is still valid. I didn't get a chance to check on that. But anyway, in the appendix, there's some explanations under Appendix 13.3.3, 10.3, that states that the application of a wet extinguishing agent, particularly like water hose streams, can accelerate and does accelerate combustible metal fire and could result in an explosion. And this is because the water reacts with the aluminum in that high temperature environment and can give off highly flammable hydrogen gas. It's a byproduct. It gives off hydrogen gas. And this conversion of water into hydrogen has a heating value, British thermal units per pound, here comes the science, of about 2.8 times of gasoline, which is why hydrogen is used as rocket fuel. It's the most effective fuel there is. And that assumes 100% conversion of hydrogen in the water. This equates to flowing 42.8 gallons per minute of gasoline on the fire for every 100 gallons of water. Oops. Thus, in lieu of using a wet extinguishing agent, primarily water, it is recommended that a bulk dry extinguishing agent be used, such as dry sand, dry soda ash, which is ash basically, or dry sodium chloride. So if you don't have any bulk drying agents available, the best approach may be to isolate the material as much as possible, protect exposures, use your rule of thumb and allow the fire to burn out naturally. Meaning, be far enough away that you can't get injured. That's what the rule of thumb means. So, proper training is a must to properly identify and handle these unique fires. Manufacturers and fire departments with combustible metals in their jurisdictions should review Clause 13 of NFPA 484 Standard on Combustible Metals.
Yeah, when we did a sodium fire, we had a sodium metal fire when I was in Fort Saskatchewan. That fortunately there was some signs on the outside of the yard of this place that were actually old. They were from the previous business, but they scared the captain on the truck enough to say, you know what, maybe we'll just wait here at the gate. It was middle of the night kind of call. Somebody else, a passerby, had called it in, and they didn't go in, which is good because the place was full of all kinds of chemicals and sodium metal, and it was open in containers everywhere. And yeah, it was a good thing. We dodged a bullet there.
But most firefighters would recognize phosphorus, sodium, magnesium as
Yep,
stay away from materials.
but not
But
aluminum.
would they add aluminum and iron, steel to that list?
Right,
They
exactly.
should.
Yeah, yeah. I remember that destroyer burning in the Falklands War that got hit by a
Oh yeah,
missile, aluminum superstructure destroyer, and there was nothing left. Well, look at your
yeah.
basic. Actually, a friend of mine, the distant relative from Michigan, was sending me articles about F-150 trucks burning, and of course, when they burn, there's nothing left because it's all aluminum body, right? Okay, recommendation
Right down
number
to the
3.
wheel nuts, right?
Yeah, exactly. Fire departments should ensure that standard operating guidelines are developed, implemented, and enforced. Of course, the discussion here is SOGs enable the individual fire department members an opportunity to read and maintain a level of assumed understanding with procedures. And this little department, 1,000 people, didn't have any SOGs. Well, my little fire department in Dalmeny, Saskatchewan, back in 1986, didn't have any SOGs either. Recommendation number 4, fire departments should ensure proper scene size up and risk assessment when responding to high risk occupancies such as foundries, mills, processing plants, etc. As per NFPA 1620, the pre-planning standard, a foundry would be classified as an industrial occupancy and is defined as an occupancy in which products are manufactured or which processing, assembling, mixing, packaging, finishing, decorating, or repair operations are conducted. When responding to high-risk occupancy, such as a foundry, the first officer or incident commander must conduct a proper size-up of the incident, including a risk assessment in terms of life safety for responders and occupants. The officer here was fooled. He thought the blue flame and the red glow in the bottom, he thought it was cutting oil. And he was really thinking of a petrochemical-based fire, which it wasn't. It was a metal-based fire.
Yeah.
I,
I mean,
I
they were
wonder.
basically. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Dirk.
I wonder, like part of your risk assessment and your scene size. I was also talking to the responsible person on site. The report didn't mention this. I'm not sure if we get there,
Yeah,
but
they said they did.
yeah. So whoever he talked to had no idea, right?
They said 2 people on site, and
Yeah.
they said they
Right.
assured him there's
Yeah.
no magnesium. So the fire
Right.
chief probably
Yeah.
asked about magnesium, which is what we
Yeah.
all think of with
Yeah.
burning metals. And the guy said absolutely no magnesium in there. Right? They probably don't deal with any. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the guys on site was almost certainly the guy that put the barrel in there.
Yeah. Right.
Who knows?
And
Yeah.
and yeah, and tactically, it looks like they were responding to this dumpster as if it was behind the Winn-Dixie or the Piggly Wiggly,
Right.
and it was not that kind of dumpster.
They weren't thinking deck gun from far away. Yeah.
Which might have done the job,
Or just let it
right?
burn. Like it's a
Yeah.
dumpster.
Yeah.
Who cares?
We don't let things burn, Paul. Do you know that? Okay, recommendation.
It's so hard to come up
It
with,
was hard, yeah.
with lights and sirens and
Yeah.
all the 4 trucks and the gear and everything, and go, oh, hey, that's a hazmat. That Daryl Begnode guy I was talking about before, he used to say, our motto is be safe, stop and first evaluate, right? And obviously they didn't do that. What's this worth? It's a dumpster. It's waste. Let it burn.
Yeah. So, recommendation number 5, the fire department should ensure a documented junior firefighter program that addresses junior firefighters being outside the hazard zone. So, the involvement of junior firefighters, teenagers less than 18 years of age, in the fire service was established early in the fire service history. Particularly, volunteer departments have welcomed teenage personnel, often alongside with other family members serving in the department. A positive lifelong connection can be achieved when starting young people out within the fire department. However, being that they are under 18 of years of age creates certain responsibilities for the fire department. In this case, the junior firefighter was aware of his duties and was not directly involved in the fire suppression. Due to the limited area around the incident, the hazard zone encompasses where the apparatus were staged. However, the junior firefighter could have been more safely utilized at the station assisting in the tanker refill away from the hazard zone. The temporary hearing loss incurred was a result of the limited area around the incident and the unexpected intensity of an explosion. Yes, yeah, it could have, should have. Nobody expected an explosion. That's why we have a fatality here. So I don't think they saw this as that dangerous. That's the
No,
takeaway from here,
we
right?
we used to have
So
a policy the juniors couldn't go to calls. They could do everything else. They could train, they could do the parade, they could wash trucks, they could stay at the hall to fill tankers, whatever, but they didn't go to
Sometimes
calls.
went afterwards and helped clean up, right?
It's just such a risky situation. Yeah. But it is a good program and lots of places do it. It's just it's hard to control it, when there's an extra seat and the guy wants to help and he's 17 and a half years old or
And
such,
you're
right?
shorthanded,
And you're shorthanded. You could really
yeah,
use it on the body to drag hose. Yeah.
especially a young back.
yeah, and you tell him to stay away, and he tried, but it
It
wasn't
was
far enough, right?
we had the same
Yeah,
debate with
yeah,
non-certified 1001 level 1 firefighters at a fire because they didn't have that certification. They didn't get it yet. And it's an outside smoky fire, a big shop or something like that. So then, okay, you should wear an SCBA. Oh, hang on, but I'm not properly
yeah,
certified trained on an SCBA. Well, what do you do? Well, that's a continual problem.
yeah. But
Yeah,
in the end, it was temporary hearing loss. So
yeah,
he
that's
wasn't
good.
even hit by debris. For me, that means he was far enough away from being
Yeah,
seriously injured. I mean, if that would have been a permanent hearing loss, maybe a different story. But
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
sure. I'm sure Mom had a different version or vision of
Yeah,
that.
probably. Mom or
Yeah,
dad. Yep.
understandably. Yeah.
mom was driving the tanker.
Could be. Recommendation number 6. Fire department should ensure all firefighters who may operate in or near a hazard zone prior to approaching have donned full complement of personal protective equipment and self-contained, such as self-contained breathing apparatus and turnout gear. Although there's no evidence of the use of that the use of PPE would have prevented the fatality or any injuries, the recommendation is provided just as good safety practice. At any dumpster fire, firefighters should be fully protected and on air to approach. Approach can be at a distance where cooling control can start well before approaching the dumpster. Firefighters should remember that there's nothing worth saving in a dumpster fire, as the contents are always unknown. A dumpster may contain Class A combustibles, discarded hazardous materials, propane tanks. A dumpster fire is literally a potential bomb and should be treated this way. In this incident, only 2 firefighters on scene were wearing their full PPE. Okay, I'm going to get on a soapbox here. Nothing pisses me off more than a whole crew of firefighters fighting to put out a garbage truck. It's a garbage truck. It's a write-off. Surround and drown it. Let it go. What happened last week in New Jersey? The garbage truck exploded and shrapnel flew like a quarter of a mile away. It was a compressed natural gas garbage truck, which is a whole other hazard. But I
Pretty
mean,
impressive bang, though.
well, yeah.
Oh yeah,
Why are we
It just
fighting these?
disintegrated,
Why are we fighting
yeah.
these? Let it burn.
especially if you know there's CNG there.
Yeah, but it's a garbage truck. I mean,
Yeah.
and I did it too. I remember working beside a extendable boom backhoe, pulling garbage out of one of those compressed containers that they push it all into because it started smoking and caught fire. And we're there trying to put it out, and we're going like, why?
Yeah. But again, how many times do you see, amateur video of firefighters fighting car fires with no BA on?
Right.
It just, and I saw a video of three guys entering a house on fire through the doorway, and the video was all about how the nozzle man did a great job of nozzle control, and he was controlling the heat and the flames coming out. Well, the guy standing on his left had his belt straps on his BA hanging down, and he was standing up because he was too large to bend over, and the fire was catching him from the shoulders up, and he only had his air pack half on, and then he went in.
Oh
So
boy.
Yeah,
we,
but
as a
honestly, I
chiefs and
think
training officers, you got to see
yeah,
this stuff.
we've seen this more like 10, 15 years ago. I think it's getting less.
It's better. Okay, I'll go with
It's
you.
getting. I think it's getting better. And then back to the dumpster here. I was actually practicing this with my crew a couple months ago when it was still not freezing. Trying to use our deck gun to lob water
Way to
into the
go.
dumpster, because those dumpsters, they're a pain in the ass, to be honest. If you overhaul, you gotta dig in there, and it's like, for what? Some of them have so many holes that you can't fill enough water into the top because it's running out the bottom. So we try to play with our deck gun. Unfortunately, our deck gun is very hard to operate because it's telescopic and it's got a remote control. So we found it very hard for the pump operator to stage that rig properly.
Yeah.
And we're talking about residential dumpsters most of the
But
time.
that's
Well,
training,
you'd think, having been there 3 times in a row this month.
practice.
Yeah, and you know what? If we are able to lob that water into it, then we got 1,850 liters in that thing in like a minute, and then we can go home.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and I think that was the main thing. With some nights, our downtown guys, they respond to dumpster fires like every 5 minutes, and that gets very
The
old
only
very
thing,
fast, right?
the only thing to save on a dumpster is the plastic lids.
My soapbox is we need to practice with deck guns. We need to practice with our deck gun for two main reasons. One, of course, dumpster fires and stuff like that. I mean, you have got beautiful $15,000 automatic, telescopic, remote control deck guns. Unfortunately, they don't have a straight stream nozzle on them, probably, which should. But anyway, you need to train to use them. One for dumpsters that he's getting his smoothbore nozzle out and demonstrating for the public here, but also you need to be able to use it to hit the third floor windows of an apartment building or a structure. You need that, be able to do that quick hit. And that quick hit is not easy. The only way to do it is practice and running from the tank, making sure the right size of tip. What do I pump at? Don't forget your tank to pump line is only good for about 2,000 liters a minute, 500 gallons a minute. That's what the rating is for. So you have to watch out for that too. But so many buildings have been saved by quick hits with the deck gun to allow even rescues. That's my little soapbox, and I'll get off
So
it now.
to push you off that soapbox and put myself on it, because you used to sell fire trucks. Um, you have to be up there. You cannot do this with a remote hand control where you can
Why?
barely see, because you have to be up there to aim, because you're losing so much
Back
more.
away.
But yeah, how far? You know, you got to see it to believe it, but it is really hard, and you can practice it.
It gets easier, Dirk, when you're there the week before and the week before, so you know where to spot the truck.
Yes, but the location is different. The location is different every time.
You're a metropolitan firefighter. You're probably not allowed to crawl. You're not allowed to get on top of the truck, right? That's against a policy. You might fall.
Yeah, and it wouldn't do anything because you cannot manually operate the deck gun from there,
No, you
right?
got a
So
remote
that
control
is,
already.
but somebody sold that to my fire department, and somebody thought that's a great idea. I'm just pointing fingers at Paul here because he's selling. Anyhow, that's my
Ooh,
soapbox.
ooh,
Ooh, all right. Getting nasty
you have to
here. Here
beep
we
that
go.
word out. Okay, recommendation number 7. Manufacturing facilities that use combustible metals should implement measures such as limited access disposal sites and container labeling to control risks to emergency responders from waste fires. Of course, container labeling is only good if the container's not on fire. So maybe labeling remote from the container would work. So the discussion associated with this recommendation is that manufacturing facilities should have their own standard operating procedures for the disposal of their own manufacturing waste. This SOP should include adequate labeling of containers and storage areas for these wastes. It should also identify unique hazards if the public were to come in contact with the waste, or if firefighters or other emergency responders were to respond to an emergency at that facility. Within the previous 2 years, the foundry went from having 3 down to 1 shift per day, which reduced the amount of waste being produced. When the foundry was operating with 3 shifts per day, they kept the 55-gallon drums of slag stacked together and separate from the aluminum alloy shavings and other metal scraps, the scraps that were in the dumpster. After the reduction in shifts, the recycling company requested that the foundry add the drums of slag, to the dumpster after the slag had solidified, so that waste could be picked up in one load. A safer procedure might have been to keep the drums of slag separate from the open air dumpster contents per the previous storage method when there were 3 shifts. NFPA 484 section 13.2.732 states that open storage of metal chips and dust particles that are readily ignitable should be isolated and segregated from other combustible materials and metal scrap to prevent propagation of a fire. In this incident, there was no labeling on the dumpster that identified the contents, and the Wisconsin Bureau of Natural Resources determined that no hazardous waste regulations were violated, right back to recognizing that aluminum shavings are a hazard.
Yep. If only NFPA had some sort of labeling system that you could put on these things in the building, in the yard, but no one uses those, the 4 diamonds.
So you could see some other possible incidents that might have happened here by putting that drum in too soon. You could have had the waste disposal truck come and pick up the drum, or pick up the bin with this drum full of molten slag in it.
Right.
And I don't think the bin was small enough to have one of those over-the-top dump trucks, but probably
I think this
pulls it
is
up
on the deck. Lift it up and put it on the
ones.
deck. Yeah.
So you could be driving down the highway with a drum full of molten slag. So there's potential issues. The fire could have happened not even at this facility. It could have happened somewhere between the facility and the waste disposal site.
A train driving through the city of London, Ontario on fire that happened a few months ago, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden they've got this huge incident.
Yeah. So as a fire department and a firefighter, you roll up on a rollaway truck like that that's got a big dumpster in the back of it, and the dumpster's on fire. What do you know about that dumpster?
Nothing.
I mean, even though you've got an SOP at the facility, possibly, that talks about the hazards, they might have had one here, but it certainly didn't seem to be well known amongst the facility employees. What do you know as a firefighter when you roll up on this on the I-40? What do you know?
And
it's burning. It's got a nice bluish green flame to it.
Should that container have had DOT placards on it as a flammable solid?
Well, like they just said here, there were no hazardous waste regulations violated. So chances are pretty good it wouldn't have been placarded.
Yeah, the quantity of slag might have been too small to trigger. Like for compressed gases, it's over 6 bottles. So you can have 5, no placards.
Yeah. All I'm saying is SOGs are not the be all and end all. You've got to know what you're dealing with. Knowledge is good. Situational awareness.
Manufacturing facilities that use combustible metal should implement a bulk dry extinguishing agent, storage, and delivery system for the fire department. I think I said this earlier. The first thing I was thinking is Metal X, right?
Yep.
So
I wanted you.
Yeah. Discussion. The fire departments do not routinely have bulk dry extinguishing agents on hand or a method to implement their use. The NFPA standard for combustible metals, paragraph A13.3.3.10.3, states the facilities that use combustible metals should provide these dry extinguishing agents in the area near where the combustible metals are used and stored, including the scrap. And I got a little example for this. Back in the old country, we had an old tanker truck, water tanker, that also had dry chem, about 750 kilos of dry chem in it. And we were the ones that were sent to the university hospital when there was a helicopter landing after I think 1,700 hours, 1,800 hours. So they had some staff there on site that were trained as firefighters. I'm doing the exclamation marks here, as firefighters. That had extinguishment agents for a helicopter crash on the roof. So in the after hours, we had to go there, just a captain and a driver, and basically babysit the landing of the helicopter. So there was something specifically for that area, for the hazard in that area. There was an extinguishing agent supplied to the fire department and to trained personnel on site. And that just crossed my mind when I read this. Like there should have been something there. And even if it's just dry sand, like have stored dry sand there, have a front loader, and you can just dump that in there if it starts smoking, right? So that would have been
Exactly.
like my idea. The problem is in the winter, finding dry sand, if it was not stored specifically for that purpose, then just wet sand doesn't really do it,
Yeah. I
right?
really wonder what they've done now.
If they would have had a
Yeah,
Quonset there and a dry sand, that would have worked fine.
yeah.
Exactly. No, and that's very good. That brought me up to the subject of what is it, Brampton, Ontario, that bought those two specialty trucks
The
we saw
specialty
this
trucks,
week.
yes, yeah.
One was with the Drago fire extinguishing system, which is it's like a big truck mounted PPV fan, but it injects water as well. And then they also
Yeah.
had an
Super cooler.
ultra high pressure pump system on the truck and a piercing system that pyrolance that they can use to pierce through metal containers and walls and stuff like that, which some places are using for lithium ion batteries. So it's interesting to note that that Brampton bought two specialty trucks like that just for that, kind of like your specialty truck in Germany you talked about with the foam, water, and dry chemical on it.
You remind me very much of the specialty trucks for big chemical and oil refineries in Germany. They have
Yep.
these, and that big fan also for tunnel fires.
Right.
But that,
Right.
you know,
Exactly. Yeah.
very specialized. Yeah.
Recommendation number 9, I think this is the last one, is the manufacturing facilities that use combustible metals should establish a specially trained fire brigade. So the hospital you talked about had some people during the day working hours that would be the fire suppression crew for the helicopter landing. But when those staff weren't there, the municipal fire department had an agreement where they would send a couple of firefighters to operate those systems. So exactly. And Denis, you worked extensively with specially trained fire brigades, which are often volunteers within the facility that get special training and respond to alarms. Knowledgeable in the permissible methods of firefighting, fighting incipient fires within the areas that utilize or contain combustible metals can be a very effective means of fire protection. Only specially trained personnel should be permitted to engage in fire control activities. All other personnel should be evacuated upon arrival of the local fire department. Fire control activities should be made by a unified incident command that includes these knowledgeable plant personnel. This article, which we actually got through the Building Construction for the Fire Service Facebook page from our friend Rick DeGroot, he had commentary on his page here that says building construction size up elements include type and quantity of materials that may be stored within or outside an occupancy. A high hazard manufacturing plant, such as a foundry, will typically have waste materials and other waste that may be, or other materials that must be stored and disposed of properly. Periodic building familiarization tours of such high hazard occupancies should be conducted regularly so that the fire authorities are aware of the presence of such materials. The mixing of combustible metals with other materials should be discouraged because of the severe risks of fires and explosion. Remember firefighter Stephen Koser, which is the fatality in this incident, by reviewing the properties of combustible metals and extinguishing techniques for fires involving combustible metals with your crew members today. This reminds Denis, you said when we started, you talked about this reminded you of West Texas, where the local fertilizer company had a large amount of ammonium nitrate stored there. Unbeknownst to them, there was a fire at the place. They responded, killed 9 firefighters. The ammonium nitrate pyrolyzed and decomposed and caused a massive explosion.
Small volunteer fire department wiped out.
Yep, yep.
So if I could just, I know in the minds of some of the people listening to us, they're going, well, who thought that aluminum, or aluminum shavings was combustible, and and there are lots of references to NFPA 484, and what's in there is aluminum listed. How would I know, for instance? And as a fire department, the onus is on the facility operator to tell you, basically, and the onus is on you to ask. And let me quote to you section 5.2.4 of NFPA 484, which is what they call the applicability of this document. And it says here, only those specific forms of metal, powder, dust, or alloys of those materials that can be documented through accepted testing and shown that in the form that they are there at that plant don't satisfy the conditions and definitions of combustibility or explosibility shall qualify for exclusion. So in other words, if you see something like waste material of a metal description in a facility as you're the firefighter doing your walkthrough, you need to demand of the facility operators that they provide testing, proof testing by a third party that those particular materials, in the form that you see them, in the condition that you see them, in the competent and the way they're going to be stored, are not a hazard. So the onus is on the building owner to show you that they are not hazardous. It's not on
Yeah.
you to say, well, that's probably hazardous, although you should still be doing that. But the onus is on you to ask the questions and to make them provide the documentation.
Oh yeah.
Otherwise, you got to do just like you suggested. Stand outside the fence. Let's see what happens, boys.
That sodium fire during the investigation phase after the building had burnt down, the plant personnel were so lax at their procedures and they were so intrusive in the investigation scene and disturbing stuff and with all kinds of chemicals in the scene, of course, from this burned building. We actually had to get Alberta Occupational Health and Safety to issue a stop work order on the company to get out of there and to leave it alone until we could render the scene secure. They were so lax at how they treated sodium metal, diesel fuel, cutting oil, propane, everything. They were just like, there's no risk here. And I mean, sodium metal, just expose it to air and it'll light up. But and I learned lots about it. There's actually our friend Gordon Routley years ago in the 90s did an investigation of a fire where sodium metal killed several firefighters. They responded to this scene and it exploded. It's so old I kind of hesitated on doing it in the podcast, but it's a similar incident to this one. Firefighters show up, try to do their best, and get killed. I hope this has been informative for you, this discussion. Thanks for listening to another episode of our Emergency Traffic Podcast. And as they said on Hill Street Blues, let's be careful out there.
You can't train too much for a job that can kill you in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to live long enough to gather all these experiences for themselves. So it's good to learn from others. Especially if the experience kills you, you can't learn very much. So you should learn from others. And this is, I think, why we do this podcast.
Yeah, I was recently on the Fire Department Safety Officers Association webinar, and we talked about how do we give firefighters more experience today when they're not going to that many fire calls. They don't have the diverse background because they're doing a lot of medical calls and traffic accidents and all that kind of stuff. And this podcast is one way, an innovative way that we can give you some experience on an event that you may never experience, that might come to mind. So that's why we do the podcast.
Yeah, don't be complacent.